Okay, so now we're recording. Great. So thanks everyone for coming. And I'll just share that I have an interest in this redistricting, and I actually submitted an application to be part of this commission. And I made it through a few rounds of cuts and eventually was cut and didn't make it, but it was such an interesting process. And I know that it's a pretty rigorous application process. And there were thousands and thousands of people who put their name in. And then the next step is you have to actually complete an application and write essays. So that cut a bunch of people out, but there were still several thousand people who submitted applications. So we can feel confident that the members of the commission are actually highly qualified and really an impressive representation of the citizens of our state. So today with us, we have Derek Taylor, and Commissioner Taylor is currently an investigator with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and he has served California communities for over 25 years. As an investigator, Mr. Taylor ensures that investigations are completed in a just and equitable manner in a wide variety of categories ranging from assaults to computer crimes. Mr. Taylor received his BA in accounting from Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia, and a master's degree in crime law and society from the University of California, Irvine. Mr. Taylor is an active volunteer in the Los Angeles and San Gabriel Valley areas, serving as a mentor and coach, among other duties. So welcome, Commissioner Taylor. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, much appreciated. Will you be handling the slide presentation?
Yes, so are you ready to go with that? Should I start sharing the slides?
Start sharing the slides. I'm ready when you are.
Okay, here we go. Okay, I think we're good.
Thank you very much. Let's start with slide number 1, just sort of a landing point.
Is this, what slide am I on? Okay, there we go. Slide number 1, there we go.
Once again, thank you for inviting the California Citizens Redistricting Commission to present at your meeting. My name is previously stated as Derek Taylor, and I am one of the 14 commissioners selected to draw the new electoral district lines following the 2020 census. Before I begin the formal presentation, I want to share a bit about myself and why I chose to apply to be one of the commission, to be on the commission. I am a married father of 3. I have a 16-year-old, a 12-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And I think oftentimes we try to instill or preach to our children to be active participants, to have a say in our democratic process, to be engaged in community endeavors. So when I heard about the commission on the radio, I thought that I should put my money where my mouth is. And I thought, to emulate behavior I want my children to partake in, it was time for me to do what I thought would be my civic duty. So my children inspired me to be a part of the process. And then secondly, in these times, especially as people question democracy or wonder the true foundations, I thought I would be a good witness to our democratic process, that my friends and family could see a tangible example of our democracy at work. And I thought that I can be a good touch point for my circle of friends as well as others to see some of our democracy working at hand. So that really spurred me to put my application in and to put up with the process. And at last, here I am. So that being said, in this redistricting basics presentation, we'll be going over who the commission is, what we do, and how you can get involved in the process. Slide number 2, please. So there's a friendly reminder. California Government Code Section 8253 strictly forbids commissioners and staff from taking public input outside of a regularly scheduled commission meeting or official public input meeting. However, at any point, you're more than welcome to visit our website at wedrawthelinesca.org to provide input. You will find instructions on how to do so under the public comment section. Next slide, please. The million-dollar question. What is redistricting? We are trying really hard to make redistricting sexy. The word is hard enough to say as it is, but it's rather challenging. Redistricting is defined as drawing new boundaries that determine which Californians are represented by each electoral district. The little doodle on the screen in the presentation shows you how the census, redistricting, and represented are all interrelated, drawing the new boundaries that determine which Californians are represented by each elected official. Next slide, please. Why do we draw new lines? You might be wondering why we have to redraw district lines every 10 years. It is important to note that a lot changes in those 10 years. Communities change, which includes priorities, interests, goals, the makeup of a community. People are born and die and move. They move within California and out of California. Communities grow and shrink in population size. Areas where there once was roughly the same number of people become unequal. These are some of the reasons districts need to be redrawn. As communities change, the districts need to be updated to reflect those changes. Next slide, please. One of the greatest powers that the people of California have is to elect their own representatives to conduct the business of their government. How the district boundaries are configured can make the difference between empowering and maximizing the voter's voice or minimizing and muting those voices. In most other states, politicians redraw districts and often end up drawing safe districts for themselves to allow them to stay in office. Redistricting has been used at times to exclude communities from political power. By fully participating in and monitoring the upcoming redistricting process, more communities may have the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. Speaking up about your community is critical to help keep your community whole to the extent possible. This ensures that your voice is heard by your elected leaders when making decisions such as quality of life and funding of your child's education or determining your tax rates. Your input is valuable in shaping the new political boundaries. Next slide, please. How does redistricting affect you? What's the practical purpose of redistricting? We thought it would be beneficial for us to break down how redistricting affects you directly. Power to the people. The Voters' First Act was historic in California. It transferred the power of drawing district maps away from politicians and gave it to the people. Redistricting will enable you to champion your issues. Having the opportunity to elect representatives that champion your issues is important in a state like California, where issues can vary drastically from one street to the next. Northern California might champion environmental and economic issues, while Central California might champion water and agricultural issues. And Southern California might champion issues dealing with transportation, housing, and employment. Redistricting can set funding priorities. Tied to the issue of elected representatives that champion your issues, you might want to elect representatives that have your financial interests at heart. When the time comes to build a budget, you will want a representative fighting to ensure your community gets the financial resources it deserves for various services such as education, water, and fire protection, to name a few. Redistricting can set community boundaries. The redistricting process is all about drawing lines and determining which communities get grouped into districts. Your input in this process is essential to help commissioners understand where your community starts and ends. Redistricting in California is one of the few civic activities that any Californian can provide input to regarding their community that ultimately impacts the law and regulations, tax structure, how funding is distributed, and which services are provided. Next slide, please. Redistricting is the road to fair representation. The US Constitution requires that every American receive as close to equal representation as possible in government. As populations of districts change over time, it can leave some people overrepresented and others underrepresented in government. Redistricting evens out the population between districts. After the federal government publishes updated census information, California must redraw the boundaries of its congressional, state senate, state assembly, and state board of equalization districts so that the districts correctly reflect the latest count of the state's population. Redistricting is based on the idea that each of our voices should be represented fairly by creating districts that have the same number of people. Census results are used to draw new maps every 10 years to account for the ways that populations have changed and moved across the states and districts. At the federal level, reapportionment takes place to reallocate US House seats among the states. This too is done after each national census to ensure that seats are held by the states in proportion to the size of their population. California currently has 53 House seats. That may change after we get the updated census numbers. Historically, legislators have drawn maps that allowed them to choose their constituents rather than enabling constituents to choose their representatives, taking power away from the people. This former system undermined the concept of fair representation, which is to give people the power to choose their representatives. Next slide, please. Thank you. Independent redistricting matters. We have talked about how redistricting affects you, and now we explain why independent redistricting matters. Democracy depends on voters having the opportunity to choose their representatives. When elected officials redraw the lines of their own districts, they get to design their own territory and choose who their voters are. This slide highlights key terms in redistricting to help you understand why it is important to delegate the power of redistricting to the people. Gerrymandering happens when the election district boundaries are drawn in a way that gives a particular set of people, like a political party or a racial group, an unfair political advantage over another. This graph shows how in a jurisdiction with 50 people, 60% orange and 40% purple, 5 districts can be drawn in multiple ways, but it's not always fair. The first 2 examples show 2 ways to draw district lines in a fair manner. In those examples, the districts are drawn to reflect the population proportionally. The 2 examples on the far right show ways to draw districts in a manner that does not reflect the population fairly, which is referred to as gerrymandering. Those districts are drawn in a manner that a political party or a racial group could win, as opposed to applying the population fairly. This is why independent commissions like the California's commissions were created, to remove the politics from the process and focus on the people. Next slide, please. The commission must follow these criteria in this order when drawing district maps. Districts must be of nearly equal population to comply with the US Constitution. Number 2, districts must comply with the Voting Rights Act to ensure that minorities have a fair opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. Number 3, districts must be drawn contiguously so that all parts of the districts are connected to each other. Number 4, districts must minimize the division of cities, counties, neighborhoods, and communities of interest to the best extent possible. Number 5, districts should be geographically compact, such that nearby areas of population are not bypassed for more distant populations. This requirement refers to density and not shape. And number 6, where practicable, each Senate district should be comprised of 2 complete and adjacent assembly districts. Board of Equalization districts should be comprised of 10 complete and adjacent state Senate districts. In addition, the place of residence of any incumbent or political candidate may not be considered in the creation of a map, and districts may not be drawn for the purpose of favoring or discriminating against an incumbent, political candidate, or political party. Next slide, please. There are different redistricting efforts throughout the states, and we are one of the many efforts occurring in California. The commission is redrawing the districts for state office, while counties, cities, school districts, water districts, and community college districts are also redrawing their districts at the same time. We wanted to bring this to your attention because different efforts are happening simultaneously, and it can be confusing. Aside from being involved in the state redistricting process, we encourage you to also be involved in your local redistricting efforts. Participate in all forms up and down the ballot, up and down the states. Next slide, please. Thank you. What is the history of redistricting? Well, prior to 2010, legislatures in California drew the lines. If the legislature failed to properly draw the lines, the courts drew the lines. In 2008, California voters passed Proposition 11, the Voters' First Act, authorizing the creation of an independent commission to draw new district lines for the state Senate, state assembly, and Board of Equalization. In 2010, Proposition 20, the Voters' First Act for Congress, added the responsibility for drawing congressional districts to the commission. Our goal as a commission is to spread the word that the people's role did not end with being counted in the census, and to collect valuable community input to assist us in the process of drawing new district lines. The commission is seeking the public's input to aid in their decision-making process. The 2010 Redistricting Commission was California's first independent commission. The 2020 Redistricting Commission is building upon their work and will leave behind detailed documents to assist the 2030 Commission when they perform their duties. Other states with independent commissions include Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Michigan, Montana, and Washington. And there are a number of other states that are currently in the process or seeking out more information to possibly instill their own independent redistricting process. Next slide, please. As was alluded earlier, what was the commissioner's selection process? The commissioners all went through a rigorous application process that attracted over 20,000 applicants in 2019. After an initial review, over 2,000 individuals completed a supplemental application. After a very thorough and public review, 120 applicants, 40 Democrats, 40 Republicans, and 40 others, or those not affiliated with those two major parties, were invited to interview, from which 60, 20 Democrats, 20 Republicans, and 20 not affiliated with the two major parties, were chosen to be presented to the legislature. The California legislature was allowed to remove no more than 24 candidates, 8 from each candidate pool, from the consideration, leaving a total of 36. The first 8 commissioners, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 2 not affiliated with those 2 major parties, were selected through a public drawing in July 2020. I was fortunate enough to be one of those first 8 selected from the random draw. The final 6 members, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 2 not affiliated with the 2 major parties, were then carefully selected by the first 8 commissioners in August of 2020, taking several considerations into account when selecting those final 6 to include political party, geography, race, gender, and expertise. Next slide, please. And present in front of you are the 14 members of the 2020 Commission. They are all of various backgrounds. We are a 14-member commission made up of 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 members not affiliated with either of those 2 parties. The commissioners are diverse in geography as they are in opinions and expertise. There are 7 from Northern California, 7 from Southern California, 8 women, 6 men. We range in age from the 30s to the 60s, and I fall somewhere in the middle. There are NGO leaders, engineers, pastors, law enforcement officers, political scientists, a lawyer, and public servants. We encourage you to join us at one of our commission meetings. They are currently all held online due to COVID-19. Instructions and a link for attending our online meetings are available on our website. Next slide, please. So what are the commissioner's duties? After the education sessions, the commission will hold public input meetings and accept community input and public testimony to assist it in the drawing of the new electoral maps. The commission will draw maps for 4 different government bodies. Congress, approximately 53, we'll see when the census data returns. State Senate, 40, State Assembly, 80 districts, and Board of Equalization with 4 districts. If you look on the slide, we've used an example from Sacramento to demonstrate what the different maps look like for each district. Congress has approximately 700,000, the Senate, 931,000, Assembly, 466,000 per district, and the Board of Equalization, 9 million people with those 4 districts that are applicable. Next slide, please. From February to May, and that's going to be extended longer than that, up until the decision-making process. We're conducting these redistricting basic presentations to educate the public about the redistricting process. We had divided the state into 11 outreach zones labeled A through K to better manage our outreach efforts and to build relationships with community groups. We are eager to engage with all communities. We are more than happy to set up a redistricting basic presentation with any group that requests one. We plan to have this presentation available in video form in case groups would prefer that option. And the zones as displayed on the slide, the zones and their coverage is listed. Next slide, please. And this is very important. And we'll often hear in the redistricting process, we'll hear this term communities of interest. When drawing maps, we have to be mindful of communities of interest. We can obtain the city and county information, but we need the communities of interest information from Californians. Communities of interest are defined as concentrated populations which share common social and economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of this effective and fair representation. Examples include areas in which the people share similar living standards, have a similar culture, use the same transportation facilities, have similar work opportunities, or have access to the same media. People can belong to multiple communities of interest. It's not relegated to a single community of interest. Keep in mind that a community of interest is not the same as a district, but communities of interest are key building blocks of districts. Some ways to describe your community will include the geography, waterways, rural areas, urban areas, mountain areas, boundaries, cities, towns, counties, or school areas, or things that you and your community members have in common. Next slide, please. Thank you. Describe, draw, send, participating in the process. Communities of interest can be described by creating maps and telling us about your community. While there are no clear rules on how to define a community of interest, the following are the basic elements to help you define your communities. Oral testimony. Personal stories are powerful. Share examples of things members of your communities have in common and what makes your community unique. Imagine describing your community to a visitor from out of town. Does your neighborhood share certain celebrations or traditions, like street festivals or parades? Are there important places where your community gathers, like parks or community centers? What is the history on how your community came together? This can be done at commission meetings or hearings. Written testimony. A written description can be used to tell your community's story. Describe what connects the people and why it's important that be kept together. Whenever possible, include statistics to support your testimony, including data on ethnicity, religious groups, education levels, graduation rates, median household income, poverty levels, access to technology, homeownership rates, language, isolation, voter registration rates, and other things of that sort. Consider using reliable sources such as the Census Bureau. Community issues. Communities often get involved in redistricting because they feel that issues have not been adequately addressed by their elected representatives. Highlighting community issues in personal stories and written narratives help demonstrate the importance of having elected officials who understand and respond to community needs. Has your community come together to advocate for important services, better schools, roads, or health centers in your neighborhood? Have you worked for more recognition or support of your community, like having holidays recognized or historical events commemorated? Boundary lines. Create a map of your neighborhood or area. Mark the street names and significant locations. You can include significant landmarks and gathering places, include social service agencies, community centers, shopping districts, schools, and religious places. It may be helpful to have or create a name for your community area to be a reminder about what makes your community unique. Use the electronic or paper COI tool, Community of Interest tool. Describe, draw, and send. Next slide, please. Ways to participate in the community process. You can provide the public input to the commission in several ways, including submitting your input through the Community of Interest mapping tool. You can do so by visiting our website at wedrawthelinesca.org, or by emailing us, or by phoning us, or by snail mail. You can send us a good old-fashioned letter with your public input. In addition to English, the online COI tool is available in Spanish, simplified Chinese, traditional Chinese, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Korean, Armenian, Farsi, Arabic, Russian, Japanese, Punjabi, and Khmer. Next slide, please. COVID-19 has delayed many things, including our ability to access census data to help us draw district maps. On February 12, 2021, the Census Bureau announced it would deliver redistricting data to all states by September 30th, 2021. And in March, the Census Bureau announced it would provide the census data in a legacy format format in late August. So any delay after July 31st in the state receiving the census data means that the commission's final map will be due after December 15th. We are working with the legislature and others to minimize the impact of the delay on the 2022 elections. Next slide, please. So if you look at what we have on the slide so far, or presently, that was our timeline. And our timeline is contingent on when we receive that census information. So originally, our plan was to, from February to May, to reach out and do those education presentations. And that's gonna be extended. From June to October, we had anticipated we'd have our public input meetings, but that again will be contingent on when we receive the census data and how that relates to the receiving of that information, how long we can extend, or how many public input meetings we can make available. Once the census data is received, hopefully before September 30th, we can begin working on those maps. And then somewhere between November and December, we have the public input meetings, the pre-district maps, and the draft maps. Then after the draft maps are released, we will be able to have the review and the final maps prepared and review. Our goal is to come in before this February 15th that is outlined. So this is sort of a, based on the information we have, this is sort of a rough timeline of what may happen with the redistricting process. Next slide, please. Finally, I have to reiterate, California Government Code Section 8253.3 strictly forbids commissioners and staff from taking public input outside of a regular scheduled commission meeting or official public input meeting. However, at any point, you're more than welcome to visit our website at wedrawthelineca.org to provide input. You will find instructions on how to do so under the public comment section. And the next slide, and I think it's the final slide. Because we want to engage the public in the redistricting process, we are conducting these educational sessions like today's presentation prior to going out for public input. To request an educational session, please contact the commission by emailing patricia.vasquez-topit@crc.ca.gov. And please follow us on social media at WeDrawTheLinesCA. I know it's a lot of information to chew on. I hope I'm provide a little bit of clarity. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer some questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll try to find out for you. And yeah, I hope this is informative.
So thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. The Q&A window is open. And I do have one question that I'll start off with. And I was actually really curious about the process and the timeline, given the issues that there may be with when the census data is released, but you covered that. And then after you draw and submit the maps, is it possible that people will not like the maps and try to litigate the maps and try to change the maps that have been submitted?
So absolutely. I think even with even taking into account the public input that you receive, and again, we want to encourage as much public input as possible. There's no way to satisfy everyone's belief on how the maps should be. So our goal would be, or is, to to take all of that input, to try to process it appropriately, and to using the 6 criteria as given to choose or draw those lines. So litigation to some extent for us is anticipated. Whether someone believes that the process wasn't followed as it should have been, or whether or not someone agrees with how the maps were drawn or where the district lines fall, litigation is sort of anticipated, just for the simple fact that it just might be someone else's belief of where those districts should have been or should have been drawn. If that answers the question.
It sure does. Nobody else is posting questions, so I'll ask another one. And I wonder if you guys are feeling, if the commissioners, just, I guess this is more almost personal, are feeling satisfied by the remote way that we're forced to do outreach right now. I mean, I know there's no real way around it, or if you're you're kind of itching to get out in the field and talk to people in person or have, group in-person meetings. Do you think that's making a difference?
So that's a great question. And you as an applicant, maybe I'm going to dive in a little bit with you. I like conversation. So starting with this process, I also saw opportunity to visit places of California that I hadn't frequented. I saw this as an opportunity to explore the state that I was born and raised in even more thoroughly. So at the beginning of it, I was telling my wife is like, we're going to see some of California that we haven't seen. And so COVID hits, and that sort of put a stifle on my plans of exploration.
Right.
But the flip side of that was through this virtual format, we're able to, in short time frames, go to so many other individual communities. So this very educational session right here. This is a fairly personal touch that may not have happened if we were on a road trip, so to speak. We would be thinking more from the sense of how we can see people face to face, and we may have missed this opportunity to touch so many other communities virtually, because I can hit a community this morning, another community this afternoon, and then another community later in the week that I just would not have been able to do with how geographically large California is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it took away a little bit of that personal touch, but I think we're able to expand the reach and penetration that we can for public outreach, and we can elicit more public input.
Yeah, that's great. And so now we do have a question posted. Do you think that the current districts are properly drawn, and are there any existing issues that you're trying to remedy?
So I like to view it, and I think we've all are approaching this from a clean slate point of view. So I'm not personally, and I think we've done it as a whole, we're not necessarily rendering judgment on the past maps. Our outlook is how can we take all the input that we've been given and draw good maps for this iteration, for the 2010 commission. So using our criteria of population and VRA compliance, contiguity, compactness, communities of interest, and trying to nest all of those districts together. That is what we're using, or that is our outlook on drawing these new maps. So the complexity that comes with all that are the challenges, but our outlook is to take the criteria we've been given, take the public input as it comes, synthesize that information, and try to draw good maps.
I think that'll give you just personally a different perspective on the redistricting that's happening in LA County and then LA City. You know, when you look at some of our council districts in the city, mm-hmm. they're real crazy. And I think you're probably just learning a lot about the process, and I would expect that would give you just a sort of a different perspective on all of the other districts and how and why they exist.
Yeah, absolutely. So the prior maps, it's not as this, you know, and I don't want anyone to think that they're being ignored. It might be sort of a footing, or you can visualize a visualization, sort of to set you on a path without judging the quality of what that map is. It can bring you into an area center. But we want to take the information, because the information is always changing. So we want to take the information that we get. Our information is different than the information that the 2010 Commission has. And our information that we have that we'll work off of will be different than the information that the 2030 Commission has. So the points that they had to draw their lines aren't necessarily relevant to us. So we have to use the information that's in front of us.
Right. Well, thank you so much for this presentation. I think it's been really interesting and informative. And I want to encourage all the people who are on this call who most likely live in Los Feliz to get onto these websites and talk about our community of interest. Right now, Los Feliz is split. We don't, you know, we are one community, but we don't all have the same representatives. So I think I would like to see that be a little bit different. So I think if we can all share our community of interest information with the Commission, that'll be helpful.
And that is the intent. As you said, that is exactly why we would want that public input. We want to know why your community should be intact, what makes it unique, and that's the information that we want to build upon as we draw the district lines. It's a collaborative effort, and we want that collaboration.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. So if anyone attending wants any more information or wants to host your own version of this, let me know and I can connect you to the right people. Otherwise, we'll again say thank you to Commissioner Taylor. Really appreciate you being here tonight, and appreciate the work that you guys are all doing. And thank you everyone for attending, and have a good evening.
Thank you all. Have a good evening. Submit that public input, and I look forward to seeing you later.
Everyone have a good night. So